Hey guys, welcome back to the 1v1 podcast. I am your host, Vlhadus, and today I have a very special guest. I have a friend. Honestly, I met you when I was in Zillin's Discord for the very first time, because I remember our very first conversation, we talked about summoners, and you're like, hey, are you going to be a fellow summoner? And I was like, possibly. I don't know yet, but I am leading in that direction. My good friend, Leviojima. What's going on, man?
It's been going good, Vlad. And are you implying that I try to convert everyone to the Church of Playing Summoner?
I don't know. I mean, hey, all I'm saying is Summoner can be a very interesting class for Ashes of Creation. And depending on how they swing it, I know a lot of people, especially that are wanting to roll Summoner, the very first class they usually talk about is Necromancer. Necromancer is a very popular class among a lot of other like D&D games. You think of like Diablo, Grim Dawn, just Necromancer is a very attractive title to raise the dead and manipulate a whole army of undead to vanquish your opponent. So is that always been what you wanted to do in like, or what's your vibe when it comes to Summoner? Like, what do you think of when you think of Summoner?
So funny enough, I'm one of the people in the camp of I hate the Necromancer class now.
Okay.
But I was corrupted because the first MMO that I actually got to play for hours on end was Final Fantasy XIV, right when A Realm Reborn came out.
Got you.
Due to some stuff I'd prefer not to go too deep into, I was actually kicked out of school my senior year. And so I had hours on end just sit there in a recliner. I had my PlayStation controller sitting on the arm of the recliner, keyboard on my lap, and on the other recliner arm I had my mouse, and I would use all three in game to play my summoner.
Dang.
So I'm a little bit of a purist when it comes to don't give me undead, I want to be able to summon things to kill you.
Right. But I mean, when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV, I mean, don't get me wrong, like there really isn't a summoner class, if I'm not mistaken.
No, there is a full summoner. There actually splits into two different trees. One turns into a fairy healer class, and the other one goes down just the straight, I want to summon things to damage you and kill you, and eventually they summon Bahamut.
Right. Okay, so I'm sorry, because I was like, wait a minute, there is a summoner? But yeah, they do the whole Infrit, and they have like a little pet that they have with them and everything like that. So are you basically kind of like, because when I think of summoner, I think of like Final Fantasy X. I think of like Yuna and like having these really celestial beings that basically can be summoned and assist in combat that all have completely different niches, right? So you're a summoner not because you have one thing you always summon, but because there is like a bunch of different entities depending on the situation you can influence to, have an outcome that you would want. Like, is that sort of like, or go ahead.
I'm sorry. I absolutely agree.
Okay.
I play a lot of games like Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
And utility. Yes. You always want to have the perfect thing.
And my whole thing is too, and again, I know we're talking right off the bat. Usually I want to get into like, talking about you, and which we will get to. But speaking about the summoner thing, I love the fact that Steven is a huge advocate for wanting the utility to mainly be with the bard and the summoners. I think especially in a lot of MMOs right now, we are too we've been overpowered. Like I'll say it more for the WoW crowd, because for me, the homonetization of having everything, like every class has a buff, every class has a stun, every class has an interrupt, every class has all these different things because every other class has them. So we have to keep it balanced, which means that we need more of them across the board. I think that's so boring at the end of the day. Like, you know what I mean? And again, like I haven't really experienced a game where the bulk of the utility is among two different classes. And I think a lot of people are very worried about that because they're like, well, everyone's going to want to play those two classes. I completely disagree. Like, I think the thing about those two classes, mainly Bard and Summoner, is there's going to be a level of responsibility that is akin to a tank or a healer, because most people don't want to be a tank or healer because of the responsibility that comes with being those classes, or I should say those specializations. So not everybody is going to want to be responsible for buffing people, making sure people are getting out of roots, making sure people have like certain damage buffs or certain debuffs. I mean, again, it's going to be a level of responsibility that I think people that are going to play those classes are going to feel very fulfilled in. And don't get me wrong, I want to say the bard in Final Fantasy 14 in the beginning used to be that. They used to be very centered, at least in the early stages of A Realm Reborn, and even probably Heaven's Ward, where they were very much a buff class. They weren't really meant to be a full damage dealer. Am I wrong for saying that?
So a lot of people who look at modern Final Fantasy 14
Right.
don't actually know that Summoner and Bard have changed up a lot.
Oh, for sure.
Back when Summoner first came out, I actually was doing a non-linear style Summoner, where I would summon things to support me, and then I would party tank as a player character, because the Summoner could actually out-tank tank classes with a proper setup.
Oh, dang. That's nuts. Like, and again, I never played, like, I got into Final Fantasy 14 for Shadowbringers. Like, Shadowbringers, a lot of the hype, when I remember seeing that trailer for the very first time, and this is me as a complete non-Final Fantasy 14 person, but I love Final Fantasy. I've always loved the IP. I played Final Fantasy 7, I played Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3, I played Final Fantasy 8, I played Final Fantasy 10, 10, 2, 11, and then I stopped at 13. 13 wasn't really the direction I personally liked. However, when I saw that trailer, first of all, the music, the scope, the cinematography, just everything in general. I didn't even play the previous expansions, and I was fangirling over this trailer because it was so good. I mean, damn, like that trailer, I still believe, and I will say that Endwalker's trailer, the cinematic trailer, doesn't even come close. I'm sorry, I know there's a lot of people that love the Endwalker trailer, but it doesn't even come close to me. The Shadowbringers trailer or the cinematic is by far the best opening cinematic of any MMO expansion I have ever seen. And the only one that ever comes close, in my mind, is actually SWTOR. SWTOR is the Old Republic, their cinematic. Oh my God. To me, as a very, I would say, middle of the road Star Wars person, was so amazing because the lightsaber battles in that cinematic were absolutely amazing. But I mean, so what do you think of all that?
Oh, absolutely. I think I'm excited to see what Ashes can do, considering what we've seen with their in-game stuff already. If they can transfer that over to their cinematics, it's going to be amazing.
Oh my God. No, I know. It's going to be literally like a whole other realm of craziness. And especially because they have like Unreal Engine 5 at their disposal. I mean, hell, if they could even pay Weta, you know what I mean? Weta Studios to go in and make them a really awesome trailer, like the way, you know, Blizzard does. You know, I think every single Blizzard cinematic has been a Weta production. I mean, they basically do that very, very, very early on because, of course, it takes a lot of manpower and a lot of hours to make those cinematics, even if it is going to be a 3-minute one. But like, so now let's just kind of go into your like gaming background and like how long you've been playing MMOs, like what kind of MMOs kind of tickle your fancy more than others. Like what's your gaming history like?
So I actually grew up in an area where we didn't have access to the internet very much.
Right.
So the first game I ever played was Neopets.
Oh my God.
And
are you talking like the Digimon? Like, just to be clear, like the Digimon or like the Pokemon little ring keychain things?
No, not Tamagotchi.
Oh, okay. That's what I was referring to. Okay. So this is something completely else.
Was a little website clicker thing, but it was super easy on the computer. So with dial-up internet in the middle of nowhere, I could still play on it.
Right.
But the first console I ever got to play was the Sega Genesis. And I got the original Sonic for the Sega Genesis.
Oh my God. So, just to be real quick. So that was actually the very first gaming console I ever played too, because it was at a friend's house. And then I remember my mom and dad saying, like, I remember saying, oh, I want to get a Nintendo, because I forgot they were called Segas, and my mom and dad actually got me a Nintendo instead of a Sega. So that was literally like, it was my mistake. It was like completely my mistake, because that's what everyone called them. They called them Nintendos. Like everyone was like, oh, even though it wasn't a Nintendo, like that's what the word for it was. So I remember saying like, oh, I want a Nintendo so bad, but in my mind, I wanted a Sega because that's what I was playing. But go ahead. I'm sorry, I digress.
No, it's okay. My mother calls all gaming consoles Nintendos too.
That's what I'm saying. That's the way I was as a kid.
So anyways, it wasn't until some neighbor kids had moved in
Mm-hmm.
that they introduced me to the PlayStation platforms.
Oh wow.
First game I ever got to play on PlayStation was the Final Fantasy VIII game.
Oh, you did.
So that was my first introduction
Squall.
into role-playing style games. Squall, to this day, still one of my favorite gaming characters of all time.
Oh yeah. The very first a PlayStation game I ever played was actually 7, Final Fantasy 7. That was the very, very first game I ever played. And the second game, I remember because I actually had them both at the same time. It was actually a Christmas present. I got both Final Fantasy 7 and Metal Gear Solid. Those were the games that I got. And so it was like over. Like I had the best of like both worlds at that point. But anyway, to kind of go a little bit into you, so Final Fantasy 8, and then kind of going down a little bit further, like what was the actual like very first MMO that you played?
So the first game I got to play with a lot of people was a now discontinued game called Traven. And
Okay.
it really influenced my gaming career overall.
Okay.
It was one of those like build up your town, interact with other people, and had mass combat where you deploy troops to different people's civilizations.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an old man, 90s. His name was Wayne. He was my first ever guild master that I had. The man went through and mapped out the entire game on a spreadsheet because he wanted to find a safe place to bring all the new players together, so that way they could have a bunch of high-level players surround them and give them a safe place to start playing the game. Completely changed how I view video games.
Oh my God, that's crazy. And what year was this, if you don't mind me asking? Was it like 2001? 2002?
I was around 7 at the time, so it would have been around 2002.
Oh my God, that was my sophomore year of high school. That's crazy. So, because I remember back in that time, like Halo was just the thing. Like my first forte into the MMO genre was in 2006. And it was actually Final Fantasy 11 that was my very first MMO experience, and it was terrible. Not because the game was terrible, because my experience was terrible, just to be clear. But yeah, like, I mean, it was so crazy down that time, especially in the early 2000s. You had games like Ultima Online, you had EverQuest, and here you are playing this super niche game. And it was like a browser MMO, or was it like a legit?
Oh yeah,
it was a browser
browser.
MMO. Oh my God. Okay. So, how long were you playing that game for? Just curiously.
That particular server, they did a server reset after about 3 years.
Okay.
And then they launched a new server. We all tried to get together and play, but it just never happened again.
Right.
So I'd say I played maybe 3 months after the server reset and then just fell out of it.
Was it just because like everything was reset to the point where it felt like you were playing a whole new character, or was it just like what happened?
So we thought we'd be able to continue using our same login credentials, but for some reason, when they made the new server, they made everyone get new login credentials. So there was no way for those of us who didn't have external communication with each other to keep contact and know who each other were in game anymore. So it was just a natural break. Things like Discord hadn't come around yet.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I mean, back then, oh my God, like I didn't even know about Vent. So there was Ventrilo, right? So in 2006, like I think TeamSpeak was a thing, if I'm not mistaken, by that time. I didn't enter my first Ventrilo server probably till 2007. So, and I didn't even know what add-ons were until about the same time.
I've actually never heard of Ventura.
Really?
Like to this day, I've never heard somebody talk about that.
Yeah, there was TeamSpeak and Ventrilo. So Ventrilo was, to me, I think a very more simpler format for joining in a lobby or anything like that. Back then everything cost money, right? So I think when Discord came out, the fact that it was free was a huge thing. But everyone was like, just because it's free, what's the quality like? You know, because the quality in Ventrilo was actually pretty damn good. And so was TeamSpeak too. I think it was just sort of like Apple and Mac, or like Mac and PC, right? So it was like people that were on Ventrilo loved it, you know, but probably didn't have TeamSpeak, and the people that had TeamSpeak didn't want to do Ventrilo because TeamSpeak was fine. So it was just like a either or kind of thing. But yeah, I know, especially for me in 2007, it was just, you know, speaking to your people. I did not even realize how important it was in an MMO. And then here you are, like, you know, doing texts and having these whole like relationships at such a young age too. And feeling that bonding, like as soon as you started playing, like it makes you feel more connected and it makes you feel more invested. And as soon as that goes away, the investment just feels nil. Like it feels like, why even bother? Because you said you dropped off after a couple of months, right?
A good game you enjoy playing.
For sure.
But if you've had a good game with great people,
right,
and you lose the great people, it makes a good game a bad game.
Yes, 1000% agree. And so, like, what was your forte into, like, you know, did you ever play like World of Warcraft, or like when did you start playing even Final Fantasy 14? Was it in 2011 when it came out?
Yes, I started playing Final Fantasy 14 right after the original launch.
Oh, wow.
I did not play the
1.0.
I did not play pre-Reborn.
Okay.
So I have heard the stories about how bad it was before Reborn launched.
Oh yeah.
But
I've seen the YouTube videos. It looked absolutely terrible.
I had actually gotten into console gaming by that time, which was how I got into Reborn, is they had just released it on the PlayStation.
Right. Ooh. Yeah, because I know even just seeing YouTube videos on how different things in Final Fantasy, the 1.0 version, just how to do simple like mailing a letter or opening up trade, doing an actual, it was just a nightmare doing this very, you know, you would think, why is that a nightmare? Like, isn't it? No, in this game, doing anything you thought was easy was definitely not easy. Even the combat was just something like, how did they think this was enjoyable combat? Like, it was just absolutely terrible. But hey,
they did what New World needs to do. They just nuked the world and started over.
Yeah. Yeah. Because here's the thing with New World, there's a lot of great principles. Like the world itself is beautiful. You know what I mean? The combat to me does not appeal. But to a lot of people, they say the combat's actually not too terrible. But I can't judge that for myself. I have yet to even play not even an hour of New World. I literally played 20 minutes and I realized very quickly this game isn't for me. You know what I mean? It's just not.
They have the problem where you start out without really getting a feel for your character.
Right.
I think if during the tutorial they would have given you an option like a lot of MMOs do, where you can feel what the more powerful version of your class is, people would have understood it a lot better.
Right.
But until you get to like the halfway mark and leveling up a weapon, you just don't get to feel the weapon. It's really bad.
Well, I don't like that was the other thing too that completely disappealed to me. Just and I'm really glad Steven doesn't have that mindset of the whole Guild Wars 2 mentality of having abilities be tied to weapons. I think if you're playing a fantasy game, you have a class. Like the fantasy comes from you as a class and you saying, hey, I'm a mage. I learn mage abilities because I am a scholar of the Mage Academy, and I learned through that, not because I picked up a freaking wand and this wand has this, you know, that just makes no sense to me. Like, I just don't get that. You know what I mean? But again, you know, different strokes for different folks. I just think that there wasn't an appeal of a class, right? Because you start off just as anybody else, and then you just choose what weapon type you want to go for and go in that direction. I just don't think 3 buttons really appeals to a sort of rotational and a sort of visceral way for me to interact, you know, like what I know from World of Warcraft, or even just what I know from other like hack and slash kind of games. It just doesn't feel as rewarding to me. But again, I feel like they do need to completely just re-understand the base they have, which believe me is not much. I mean, no offense to the people that are still playing, but I mean, there's 20,000 of you that are maybe playing a month. Like, I feel like that's not an enjoyable experience. Like, you need to have more people to be in your game and enjoy what they're doing in the game. And I feel like the gear progression, the all the stuff that was awaiting them at endgame just was completely amiss, and just they didn't understand their own player base. And I think it's because they didn't even understand their own project. Originally, this was going to be a survival game, right? And I think they were just trying to throw in grindy end game tactics because I don't think they had an actual vision of what they wanted to do as a company.
Well, I can't really say it's even grindy end game content, since they locked all their best end game content behind time restrictions. You couldn't even play the end game content.
I mean, again, I'm not trying to speak as I know New World, but this is just going off of what I've heard, videos I've seen. It just, and believe me, as an MMO person, as someone who really loves MMOs, it really hurts me that it's not the developers, because I know the developers probably at Amazon are super passionate. They really wanted to make a great game, but you can clearly hear or feel the corporate influence of, we need to get this game out so I can get my money back. That's what this game reeks of to me. And it's such a shame, because you have people like Steven Sharif, who, you know, again, is a dime a dozen, right? Like that they do. I mean, I'm sorry, not a dime a dozen. That was completely wrong analogy. I wish they were a dime a dozen. I wish there was a bunch of Steven Sharifs out there, but like comes around like once in a lifetime. You know what I mean? It's like you have a person who's willing to spend a lot of their own personal cash, you know, and then of course have a Kickstarter to see where the appeal is, and basically not try to be influenced by anybody other than what they want to do for themselves. So I guess, you know, let's talk a little bit about Ashes of Creation, because I really don't want to talk about New World. No offense to New World people, but it's to me, it's such a shame, and I really don't want this to be like a downpour of hate on the game or the things they did wrong. That's been said and done so many times. But talking about Ashes of Creation, what was the thing that really appealed to you, like when you first found out about the project?
So, again, I'm really biased on this.
It's okay.
I like how it looks like they're going to be playing the Summoner.
Okay.
One thing that really made me fall out of love with Final Fantasy XIV, and it's why I stepped away for multiple years, is because they changed my child. When I first got to play Summoner, I could play it the way that I felt it was best for me to play. It was very modular, and I like those options. They eventually changed it into the straight line path of, you take this, you take this, you take this, and now you have these abilities. They're your best abilities. You have to take these abilities or else you're not effective in the game. Steven, from everything that I have seen in development and from what he says, does not like that type of railroading for players. He wants to give you the options of, you know, when you're completing this dungeon, well, maybe you go through this path because you feel like your character can more effectively fight the boss from this platform over here. And that's an option that you have.
Right.
That's really what Steven did that started me down the admittedly long rabbit hole that is Ashes of Creation development. But what's gotten me to really stick around and watch the development and dedicate myself to it was Steven himself. I mean, you can promise mechanics every way to Sunday and then just change them at any time. Having that person like Steven there who's, look, I know what I want. I know how development's going to go. I need you to put your faith in me and watch. I'm going to show you that that faith was not misplaced. It really changes how you view a project.
I completely agree. I mean, and here's the thing. I understand exactly how you feel. I played Survival Hunter in World of Warcraft from 2000, since Burning Crusade, all the way till Warlords of Draenor. And in Legion is where I stopped because they changed my child. They basically took a ranged class with explosive shot, black arrow, serpent sting, to a melee spec without those abilities. And I was pissed because I loved that class. I mean, I love that spec. And they literally, it wasn't even they railroaded me. They just completely gutted my whole spec and said, we're gonna completely redesign this thing from the ground up. And it was just something no one asked for. No one was advocating for the survival spec to just be a melee class. Like there wasn't, but this was during the same time too, where they were just changing shit for the sake of changing shit. And it really bummed me out because there were other classes that I enjoyed to play for World of Warcraft, but that was my class, man. Like that was what made me feel more to Warcraft than anything. And then when I started to try to play like Beastmaster, or I tried to start playing like Marksman or the other specs, they weren't something that I really enjoyed. But I did enjoy the Hunter class, you know what I mean? And I did play like BM for a little bit, tried out Marksman for a bit, and then I just switched to like Paladin. And then it was like Paladin and Warlock. I loved Monk, you know what I mean? But it was just, I was basically trying to chase a child that wasn't mine. You know,
it's like the game developers telling you you're wrong for how you want to enjoy our game.
Yes. And again, now I'm not even playing WoW. I'm I don't have that love, or that, like, that thing that everyone is waiting for, right? That feeling of when you're off of work and you're headed home and you're like, God, I can't wait to get inside X game right now. Like, I want to play that game so bad. Like, I think that's what everybody is missing right now. Like, everybody wants that experience again. And I feel like Ashes is just going to be that for many people. And I'm not trying to make that, I'm not trying to overhype myself either, because just like what you're saying, Steven can show a completely different summoner class that me and you are both expecting. They can show something that's very dull or not as customizable as we were hoping for. And so I'm really, really, really not trying to pigeonhole myself into thinking a certain way without seeing something first. Because I know looking into the wiki and looking into like all the things that Steven has said, it does get me excited for a lot of different classes, not just the summoner specifically, but for the fighter class, for the ranger class, for the, dare I say, tank class. I hate the word tank as a class, but hey, we will fix that eventually. It'll definitely be feedback that I will give and continue to give to Intrepid until they change. I think Protector is a great one. Protector, Guardian. I left a little thing on my YouTube asking, what other word would you prefer? And I put like Juggernaut, Bruiser, and there were more fighter classes. I know I didn't really think about it all too much, but that's why I wanted just to ask the question. And there was a lot of comments that people left being like, none of these actually appeal to me, but I really love Protector. I love Guardian. And there was one that said Defender. And I was like, honestly, I'll take anything other than tank at this point.
Controversial choice, the Phalanx.
The Phalanx? Am I just dumb and don't understand what that word means? I probably am.
It's an old Russian soldier. They were the ones with the giant shields who'd use their spears. They basically would make a giant turtle shell with their shields, and the soldiers would move as a giant force. It made it hard for enemies to attack from any side because there was always a defender there.
Interesting. And that word is called Phalanx?
Yeah.
I guess I am an idiot. Well, I've never heard that word before. That's interesting.
I had an actual military history class, so I know a little bit more about military tactics than some people do. I wouldn't call you stupid for it.
It's okay. I call myself stupid all the time. But I mean, so I guess in general, like when it comes to the kind of customization that you're looking for, when it comes to like, I mean, we'll talk about the summoner class, but just like, how do you think Steven should handle the level of customization? Because this is a topic to me, and I'll just be honest, this is my number one worry for Ashes of Creation. For me, this is a personal thing, because what I look for in MMOs is class design and class customization. That is what really gets me to get into a class and get into the MMO at large, because that's another reason why I really can't get into Final Fantasy XIV as an MMO. I love playing Final Fantasy XIV for its story, and when Endwalker is finished with its final patch, I am going to resubscribe, play through the entire Endwalker story, because that's what I did for Shadowbringers, and it was freaking amazing. So I'm going to do that again with Endwalker, but I don't play every month because it's just, there is no level of customization in that game. So
as it currently sits with Ashes, I kind of teeter between one of two camps.
Okay.
This is either going to be one of the most versatile MMOs that we've ever played, or everyone completely misunderstands what Steven has said, and there's going to be very little difference between specs inside of the classes.
Right.
And it's very minor what causes the difference, but those two camps are so close with a pin needle difference, and it comes down to the 4 options that the secondary archetype gives when it comes to the class. Because Steven has said that we're going to be able to take the 4 archetypes of your secondary, or the 4 attributes of your secondary archetype, and apply them to each of your abilities. So we know you're not getting new abilities.
Right.
But if they change the abilities enough, then there's going to be huge diversity. Everyone's going to have the customization that they're looking for, and it's going to be really individual. If they're not big changes, and it's just like minor number fixes or something like that,
or then color changes.
color changes, maybe increases the range slightly, people are going to feel like they got duped. And I'm really not sure which camp I think is right on this one. I think it's too early in development for us to say.
So I think I talked a little bit about this on my last 1v1. I'm just going to say it, and it may be a hot take. Scrap the entire 64 class design. It's not expandable. It's not good. It's not something that I don't think is really feasible for Ashes of Creation. Again, I'm not even talking about balance here. I'm talking about what people are looking for when it comes to customization. I don't think we're going to get the level of customization people are wanting in this particular format for the classes. I think a 15 class, a 13 class design with spec trees or some kind of like even Path of Exile, like a mini talent tree of Path of Exile built into each class. I think that's what people are wanting. That's the kind of level that people are almost expecting from class design from Ashes of Creation. I think what's going to end up happening is going to be the latter of what you were saying, and it's going to be very basic color changes of the same spell. So there's going to be like a summon. When you're a summoner, you're going to have like summon fairy, and that summon fairy can be augmented 8 different ways to then be summon undead, summon falcon, summon, depending on which archetype you are, but it's still a summon spell. At the end of the day, you're changing what companion comes out from the summon. And I don't know if that's going to be far enough for certain people. And I think, like you said, people are going to feel very gypped. But you could also have different archetypes, right? Like if you feel like, well, how can we really make this particular archetype seem satisfying? Like, cause I feel like there's going to be a couple of them. Like let's say on the fighter, like I think there's one that's like, damn. Do you have the 64 classes brought up on your screen? I usually don't mess with the internet while I do this. Cause I know that there's like, damn, I feel like I'm going to misspoke or say
sorry, I just pulled it up. What can I do for you?
So on the fighter class, can you give me all the different fighter archetypes?
Blade Dancer, High Sword, Weapon Master, Spell Sword, Hunter, Shadow Blade, Blade Caller, Dreadnought.
Okay. So let's say the Dread Caller or the Dreadnought, the High Sword, and the Hunter like have really thematic things that they're like really impressed with. But everything else, every other archetype feels like eh. And it's because again, like they're diversing one class into 8, and how satisfying it could be for each one. I just feel like you're setting yourself.
I lost you. Give me 1 second.
You lost my audio? Can you hear me now?
I cannot hear you anymore. All right, try again.
Can you hear me now?
I can. I don't know why that cut out the audio.
Oh, no problem. That's why I don't like messing with stuff on my end, because I just it's like after a while it gets kind of crazy. But yeah, I just feel like when it comes to the class design, I feel like there's going to be some that are going to be more important than the others. Like right now, everyone's influencing Necromancer, but what are the other summoner archetypes other than Necromancer, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that really has me worried, because like I love the idea of mixing cleric and summoner. Right. I want to be able to apply healing, support my team where needed if that's the spec I'm going into. I don't want to be forced into summoning undead for that.
For sure. But at the same time too, the reason why I feel like this also fails is because the base class, there's only one base class for healer and one for tank. Now, let me just speak to my WoW experience. If you told me that I had to heal in a priest and only a priest, I would have hated healing. But there are different classes to heal on in World of Warcraft. There's the monk, there's the druid, there's the shaman, there's the priest, there's God, I feel like I'm forgetting other specs and classes, but I'm just saying there's a variety of different ways to heal. I also don't feel that those different varieties of healing is going to transpose through the cleric class alone. I feel like there's going to be so much that one healer class has to do to appeal to all these different variants of heals. You know, like, are you going to want to be a HOTS healer? Are you going to want to be an AoE healer? Are you going to want to be like a throughput healer? Are you want to be like a huge single target healer? Are you going to want to be more of a mitigation healer? You know what I mean? Like, all these things that you can do for a certain class, but when you only have one class that has to juggle all of these different variants to appease all these different kinds of healer people, it makes it very hard. And I just feel like this certain variety of the class design is not going to be fulfilling for a lot of people, probably including myself, which is why I'm trying not to really think about this too much, because I just want to see what they end up doing. Because once I can see something like other than just what's on the wiki, I can probably make a video about it. I can let, you know, Steven and the team know my thoughts on it, and we can just kind of go from there. But like, for you specifically, like, are you more afraid of the less customization, or are you afraid that there's going to be way too much customization and that could be a problem on its own too?
So I'm not as worried about the idea of too much customization.
Okay.
The thing that really worries me is if they give as much customization as they say that they want to give us, I feel there's a good chance they shoot themselves in the foot.
How so?
One thing that I talk about when it comes to the summoner is you need to think of the summoner the same way the military thinks of, like, the Army Rangers.
Mm-hmm.
They themselves are not a military force. They are a force multiplier. You use that class to create a numerical advantage on a battlefield. If you have too many people playing a numerical advantage style build, now you have mechanics in place that are designed to be handled by 6 people being handled by effectively 9, 12, and this can cause a problem when it comes to game balance. So if they want to give us summoners that diversity of build, well, now how do they give us that without harming the people who just want to play a rogue because they think rogue is a fun class, even if they don't build for the highest damage spec possible? Well, now they don't have that diversity that my build has, and there's no real way to say we're going to give the rogue what they need without taking away the summoner and what they want in their build diversity. Because a summoner, a bard, even in some ways a mage, they tend to have a lot more tools in their toolkit than what some of the just I hit things classes have. And that concerns me. I'm worried that some classes are going to feel they got a lot better customization than other classes got.
Well, that's the thing too, is that that's exactly my whole point when it comes to the other archetypes, right? Like, you're going to have certain archetypes that are going to feel very thematic. The abilities feel very satisfying. And then you have other ones that are just very dull in comparison, because you get to the point of splitting things out into these slivers, right? Because it's 64 classes, right? And it just gets too much that now you're providing each class with like half the flavor, when other classes or other archetypes have like more just fun, more fun abilities, more fun thematic experiences. Just, and I just feel like, again, like, you have to work with a lot less, because again, when expansions happen, right? When you have like a new expansion for any MMO, people are always thinking to themselves, oh, are they going to add a new class? Like, oh my God, like, right? I think of Ashes of Creation, one base class is 81 new variants now. Like, you know what I mean? Like, how is it going to be expandable? Like, that's the other thing too that I always worry about with this particular format of the 64 class system.
So I think there are 2 different ways they could go about that.
Okay.
I've heard some people talk about the separate trees. So like instead of adding a new subtype for all the classes and the new classes with all its new subtypes, just say we're releasing 2 to 3 classes. Those 2 to 3 classes can have a secondary archetype of one of the 3 classes, and now they're their own separate block that's not part of the original class list and can only be merged with the secondary class list. I don't like that method. I think that that would be very feel bad for players, like they're getting punished just for starting the game at the start of the game.
Yes, that does. As soon as you said that, I was like, No, I know this wasn't your idea. This is just what you've heard.
It was some people's opinion. I don't like that one.
Right.
I would say if they're going to add new subclasses and they're going to do it in a way that players don't feel like they got punished for starting early, as long as we see that it is properly customizable, it's not just weird color changes and stuff like that, I would like to see them add the archetypes strictly as secondary archetypes instead of new base classes. It would allow all the original 8 archetypes to take them without making people feel like, well, now I got to start an entire new character from scratch. But I have not seen many people talk about that because I guess everyone likes how nice and neat the chart looks. They don't want to see it just expand one direction.
No, I can understand that. My whole thing is that I would just rather them go summoner with 3 or 4 specs. Like,
I agree.
Just 4 specs, pick the best 4 out of the 8. Like, clearly Necromancer is going to be one of them, right? And then you can just pick 4 so that way we can stop saying 64 classes, right? We can say there's 8 classes with 4 specs each. You can pick which specialization you want to go down. I honestly feel, and this is just me, right now, our Ashes community is very, very tiny. There's going to be a handful of us that are going to be probably up in arms with a change like that and saying, well, I really had a fantasy for being a ranger summoner or a summoner cleric or, whatever the case is. Again, I just feel like merging 2 other classes together to make a true class at the end, it doesn't work. And I feel like it's only going to be more work for the developers to try to even balance and try to even add stuff in the future, right? That I think, and I'm not saying that the WoW approach is better, but I'm just saying, like, you can make a base class with 4 specializations and have really broad trees for each specialization to kind of go into and manipulate. And there could be even flavors of other classes probably sprinkled into these trees. You know what I mean? But you're not converting to a cleric ranger or a tank fighter or anything like that. You're just being more of your class, if that makes any sense.
So I would like to ask you a little bit about your own gaming history.
Oh, for sure.
Have you played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, games like that?
So in high school, my buddy Drew Holt, good dude, I love him to death. I haven't spoken to him in a very long time, but he introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons. And we made my character. It was a dragon, like humanoid character. And I used to play that with him. We did campaigns together. It was a lot of fun. I have not played Pathfinder as of right now. I am actually playing Divinity Original Sin 2 with a couple of the guildies here in Axiom. We've gotten, not very far into that yet because we've been playing it once per week, just because of our schedules and stuff like that. But that's been fun so far. I really dig like pen and paper Dungeons and Dragons. And I think more people in the MMO community that if you haven't done that, if you haven't played that with friends or whatever, go to your local game shop, your card shop, in your town, in your area, because I am pretty sure there is someone or some group near you that is playing Dungeons and Dragons where you can either sit in or even be a part of their campaign.
Absolutely. There's also Facebook groups to help you find a group, and you can look up what's called Adventures League. But there's a reason why I brought this up specifically. If you've heard Steven's interviews about it, Ashes of Creation as a whole, and Vera, the world that we're on all came out of a D&D game that he ran. It's his own homebrew world for the system. They use a subclass style. And the way I look at the chart, I'm seeing subclasses like how Dungeons and Dragons does it. In that way, I understand where Steven's coming from, because when you're building a character in Dungeons and Dragons, especially as you go on, you have your base class, which has your list of features. You have your subclass, which usually augments those features in a limited number of ways. And then you take external components like feats and other upgrades to your character, and those flesh out your total abilities. I see the 8 archetypes as your base classes.
Right.
The subclasses are the secondaries, which is why I think that the just expanding new archetypes as the augments instead of as new classes in the game would work. But then I think that the trees that they're doing for the 3 skill trees are meant to be the feats. And I think a lot of people are not accounting for those when they're thinking about what their character is. And it's putting them in the idea that everything has to come and feel like a complete class from the tree itself. But I think those point skills are going to be as much a part of what makes a character class feel like the class itself. I don't know if I'm saying that in a way that feels fleshed out or if I'm misexplaining it, but
no, my whole thing is that I don't think the cross-pollination of having like a cleric fighter or, you know, a tank rogue or I don't think as a whole that appeals to everybody. And I think that can get very confusing very quickly. When I talk to people that know MMOs and I try to explain the 64 class chart, it already confuses people. It's not clear. And you know what I mean? And again, like all I'm saying is that I feel like people want to dig more into the class that they already are. I don't think they have this fantasy of cross-pollinating a class with another class, if that makes any sense. Like if I'm a mage, I want to get into the schools of mage. Like I want to be more of a mage. And again, like I'm saying that there are people that probably like the idea of being a mage ranger, right? Or even a mage tank, right? Being like a magic resistant tank fighter, you know what I mean? Like I think that's, to me, that sounds cool. But on the grand scheme of things, like I don't know if that's going to be feasible, and I don't know if that's going to be expandable. And the one thing, again, like I think people are more familiar with is just having these kind of, you have your basic class like a cleric, but then you have these other branches of life that you can go down, right? So you have like the priest in World of Warcraft has like discipline, it has shadow, and it has holy. You know what I mean? For the cleric here, you can have like different, like I said, you can even have 4, maybe even 5 really fleshed out specializations. But I think 8 just sounds too much, especially too much for like a brand new MMO to pull off. Like this class tree sounds like something in expansion 7 of an MMO that's been going for about 14 years. Like that's where this tree or this 64 class system kind of falls down for me, not as something as opening the game up. I just think you're biting way too much than you can chew. And especially because I would rather them focus, I would rather have a more basic, simplistic class design, right? Like class, 3 specs, whatever, just like World of Warcraft, but then have super fleshed out, like, you know, node system, religion system, caravan system, all of the other systems, because to me, that is the main attraction of Ashes of Creation, the castle sieges, the guild wars, all of those things. And all of those systems are so complex and so interdependent towards one another that to me is just, you really need to nail that, like, and it's on its own. And then just adding classes and combat on top of that. First of all, the combat has to be all satisfying, right? That's the one thing that people always say, right? We want it to feel satisfying. We want it to feel visceral. We want the sound animations to be good. You know, the swing animations to be good. Again, the 64 class system, I just don't know. Like, I'm not saying that I don't have faith in Steven, I just feel very apprehensive about it. So is there anything else you want to say on this topic before we move on? Because I don't want to beat a dead horse with what we're talking about.
No, I definitely understand. I guess my final point on it would be, coming from 7 years of Dungeons and Dragons, I can see what Steven is trying to say. I think what he's trying to say is not something a lot of MMO players grasp because it comes from outside of the idea of an MMO.
Right.
I think that if you sit down and look at something like Dungeons and Dragons, just for the general player, you'll start to get an idea of, I don't think it's going to be as different, but I don't think it's going to harm the classes.
That's fair enough. So like I guess when it goes into the other parts of Ashes of Creation, so like what was the main draw for you besides the summoner that you kind of looked at Ashes of Creation as a whole? I mean, could I just say what I think it may be? Like, do you think maybe the idea of community finally coming back to an MMO, do you think that was sort of the main thing that kind of attracted you, or maybe it was some other feature?
Well, I can say that's definitely what attracted me to Axiom.
Okay. Well, for sure, Axiom was awesome.
But when it comes to Ashes, outside of the summoner, the big thing that I'm really hoping for, and what's got my copium up, is I like the civilization development that Steven's going for.
Oh yeah.
The idea that inside the world there is a full second economic system parallel to what we have in the real world. And if you want to do something like, I don't trust myself to trade stock and stuff in the real world. Well, there's going to be a stock system in Ashes. You know what? Let's see what you can do. If you want to have that idea of, I'm going to be the banker, be the banker.
Yeah.
And you know what? There's an entire node specifically set aside so you can feel like the most powerful person in town just because you decided to spec down that really niche thing of, I want to be the banker.
Yeah, I think the stock exchange was it like when I saw that was going to be a feature, I was like, what? Like, no, like that to me sounds again like Ashes of Creation. If you look down their feature list, this game looks like it's been out for about 10 years. Like, it's insane how much stuff they want to pull off. And Steven always says this. He's like, most MMOs are very ambitious. Ashes of Creation is a much more ambitious project than most. He always says something to that effect. And he is so right. Like, and again, this is why I would want them to concentrate on their bread and butter, like their core feature set, which is the node system. The node system in general it may not be a new idea, but how Ashes is wanting to implement it is very exciting. And it's one of the things that I think people are not even ready for. I mean, I think they're like, oh, that sounds cool. But I think practically once they actually experience it for themselves, it's going to be addicting as all hell. Like,
oh yeah, it's going to take months just to get the base feel of the game down.
Oh yeah. It's going to be really bonkers. And again, I think that's the kind of thing that people have been waiting for, that next thing to really entrench them in a game and makes them feel important, makes them feel like they're part of an overall like cogwheel narrative, whether it's like their guild, whether it's because they're that banker in town that's like better than most and they're like the freaking beautiful mind of their server or whatever, and they can do some crazy deals and make some insane cash on the side. Or maybe it's because they want to be in a guild where they build boats, you know what I mean, and that's what they're known for. They're the shipbuilders of their server, or they go and they're the lumberjacks of their server, and all they're doing is chopping down trees and look like lumberjacks in game or something like that. I don't know, but I mean, it's people want to fulfill a fantasy. And I think there's so many MMOs that don't allow them to do that. And they hear a game like Ashes of Creation where all it seems is that, Intrepid and Steven want to give the players tools to allow them to play the game they want to play. And I think ultimately that speaks so loud to so many people, which is why I think this game gets a lot of criticism, because they just feel like they're not going to do it. They're going to fail. It's going to be just like every other MMO that comes out. How do you feel about that?
So I definitely want to speak to that. First thing I want to say is, just because people like you and me have been following development for a while doesn't mean we don't have the same fears you guys do. We may have consumed more actual Ashes content and know a lot more of the obscure references. It doesn't mean we don't have our own hiccups with the game.
Yep.
One of my personal biggest hiccups, and you can consider this a hot take back for your hot take earlier, I think the family summon system might end up being the worst feature in the game. I am really worried that it's going to allow people to create armies on demand in ways that kind of make you feel cheated for the having to travel. In that regard, however, just like every other player, I have to kind of set down my spectator and go, I'm just gonna put faith in Steven. I'm putting faith in Intrepid. They have shown me a list of things that put me at ease for other things. So I shouldn't just assume that they're going to screw up this one aspect of the game. And I think the more people start seeing the development process and start immersing themselves in the content, the more they're going to start having that viewpoint.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, like, I feel like now I'm learning more and more and more about the project because, you know, becoming a content creator, really going after and looking at the wiki. I feel like I'm more nervous than I was when I was just a non-creator. Because, you know, it's not because, like, and honestly, I'm a creator not because I really want to make money from it. I have a really good job. My wife has an even better job than me. Like, honestly, this to me is nothing but a hobby. Like, if this pans out and it works and I become, like, you know, I have thousands of subscribers one day, like, awesome. You know what I mean? That's great. But I don't need to make this a livelihood. You know what I mean? Or probably, I don't even know if I want to make it a livelihood. I mean, I could if that was ever the case, but I mean, I guess what I'm just trying to say is that I just want the game to be successful. You know what I mean? And I'm wanting to put as much energy as I can to go to the forums, to make videos, to say the things that I think could make this game the best game it can possibly be. Because I hear so many people advocating for more hardcore features, for more even survival game features that alienate so many casual players. And I mean, we could talk about WildStar and why that game failed, but ultimately it tried to appease to a very niche crowd and double down on it. And I don't want Ashes to do the same, because it will fail. It is like people say, oh, WildStar was ahead of its time. No, it wasn't. It wasn't going to work. And I feel like if Ashes really does buckle down to the hardcore survival crowd, or the hardcore PvP crowd, or just the hardcore MMO crowd in general, this game won't survive. And this game will see the likes of 20,000 members playing Ashes of Creation a month. You know what I mean? Because there needs to be a middle ground that I think the hardcore players probably won't admittedly say that they want to have, but it needs to be there. And speaking with the family summoning system, I would either advocate for either one or two things. Completely remove the system entirely and just have it to where if you want to go somewhere, you mount up, you know, and people will say, oh, well, what about, you know, like if I want to meet up with a friend of mine or whatever, well, you got to orchestrate that the way we did back in the old fashioned way. You know what I mean? Because even if I had my Hearthstone set to another part and he was on the other side of the continent, I still had to travel to them. You know what I mean? If I wanted to play with them, and they had to travel to me, and there was ways to do that. I just feel like if you put everybody on an even playing field, great. But I feel like with the family summoning system, I think it's going to cause more problems than it solves solutions. So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But at the same time, there are a lot more things that do worry me. You know what I mean? And I just hope that the player base at large is ready for change, because let me tell you, Alpha 2 is going to go through some very dramatic changes. I'm not saying that the whole node system is going to change overnight, but you even heard Steven say with the caravan system, oh yeah, we actually overhauled it, or we made some radical change on it a couple of months ago. Like, they're changing stuff internally, and that's probably why they're not going over everything right now, because they're still trying to solidify what feels fun, what's going to feel engaging, and what's also going to feel good over a large span of time, because this game is going to take up a lot of time for people. So do you think in general, Levio, that the time investment might feel too much compared to other MMOs? That's a hard one, right? Because I still can't answer it in my own head.
I think there will definitely be a player disparity based on time availability. I don't know if that's actually a negative for me.
Oh, probably not for me either. But I'm just saying for the casual person entirely, right? Because you always have the dads. And I hate this because I'm a dad too. And I don't want that. I don't want that. They're like, I'm a dad and I have a family and I only can play 2 hours. So I want my 2 hours to feel like the people, I want it to be in line with the people that are playing 16 hours. I think that's bull. If I play for 2 hours, it's what I have time for. If people are going to be ahead of me, so be it. Let them get ahead of me. Like, they're putting more time into the game. Like, why? Like, why am I going to advocate for everyone to be at my pace? That's stupid.
Right. You don't have the right to be a top 1%er if you don't put the dedication in that the top 1% do.
Exactly. That's like limiting the Olympics. That's like saying, oh, well, I'm a dad and I can only practice my swimming for 2 hours. So we only can practice for 2 hours, guys. You know, it's like, well, then you're not probably going to be an Olympian. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to be where those people are. So why are you trying to advocate for people to be under your practices? Like, people are going to get ahead of you, and I think that's fine. Just be with the group or be with the guild that's going to go at your pace. Try to make a group full of dads that can only play 2 hours or whatever a day. So that way you all. What was that?
I was about to say, I think that guild actually already started on the forums.
That's what I'm saying. So go and find them and be like, hey, we're a couple of, we're a guild full of dads. We're only playing for about 2 or 3 hours, probably a day, you know what I mean? Or maybe even a week, you know what I mean? And we're going to go at our pace or whatever. Like, just come and join us. Don't compare yourself to the overall whole. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's just so stupid. But I think people in general are just looking for something to really dig their teeth into at the same time. Like, I know for myself, like, I don't have probably 10 hours every day to put into Ashes of Creation, but goddamn, I want to. Like, if I could sneak out I'm like, oh, honey, I'm going to bed. Oh, and then I see her go to bed. I will literally roll out of bed and probably like sneak out to come into my game room at like 1 a.m. and play from like 1 a.m. to like 4:30. And then when hopefully she doesn't come in my game room, but if like I'm going back to the room, she's like, babe, where were you? I was like, oh, babe, my stomach was really hurting. I had to go to the other bathroom and use it for, because it just hurt so bad. And then she's like, you were playing Ashes of Creation again, weren't you? And I was like, damn it. But I mean, at the same time, like, it's something that I know I want to do, but I know a lot of people, aren't going to have that time. But I feel like, hell, don't you want a game you can sink in 2 hours a day every day for the next 4 years? Because, I mean, hell, look what's happening now. People can't even sink in a couple of hours into a game right now because there's nothing to play. Like, everything is old. Everything has been tried. Like, there's nothing to do. And the whole player base feels it. So I would rather be in this position of only being able to play 2 hours or 3 hours a day, but at least I know every time I'm looking forward to it. I am nowhere near freaking done. And I can do that for the next 4, 5, 10, 15 years, hopefully. That's a game worth playing for or waiting for, in my opinion.
I actually can attest to what you're saying. I am so bored. I have leveled up New World characters to max level 4 separate times.
Bro, what are you doing?
I don't even necessarily enjoy the game, but at least leveling up a new character gives me something to do. And that is one of the worst things to have to say as a gamer, is it was something to do.
Jesus, Steven, do you hear this? If you're watching this, save this man.
Alpha 2 next week. Let's go.
Alpha 2 tomorrow. yesterday. No, but no, seriously, that's how a lot of gamers feel. Like, it's so like blah right now. Like, the whole gaming sphere is just blah. There are people playing a game about a stray cat. That's how bored this community is, damn it. Like, I'm just saying, like, I'm not saying the game is good or bad or whatever, but I'm just saying that people are so bored they are literally playing a game about a stray cat. That's all I'm saying. So we need something to spark the air a bit. I know there's this game called Tower of Fantasy that is apparently going to be releasing sometime this week. It looks like another Genshin Impact clone game. I'm not excited for that game at all, but hey, it may be something for me to do for a couple of hours until I can get to the next thing, which is probably going to be Throne of Liberty, which will get me to the next thing, which is Alpha 2. So,
I hope you don't have to get through that many things to get to Alpha 2.
I know, but I honestly feel like Alpha 2 is not coming out till January. So I have to waste my time till then. And
now I was thinking December, so we're right at the same time frame.
So to me, December's live stream is when they're going to announce Alpha 2. That's what I've been saying, because it's the perfect time to do it. They're going to save a really nice, awesome announcement for December, which in my opinion will be Alpha 2. And Alpha 2 could start launching in January or even February. You know what I mean? And it'll all be telling too, is if we get spot testing in October, and we have our spot testing from October, November, and December, I think it's very in line that we get Alpha 2 probably in January. So, or go ahead.
I like your train of thought there. The only reason why I say December instead of January is I think they want to allow as much testing as possible, especially right at the start of Alpha 2. So they're going to want to do it while a bunch of people are on their holiday breaks. Because a lot of people will have free time they wouldn't normally have in January.
Well, Levio, I would absolutely love to be wrong. I would hope Steven just come out and says it this week. Hey guys, we're spot testing because Alpha 2 is going to be releasing in September. You know, if he says that, I'm like, hey bro, I was wrong. I was wrong before. I said Alpha 2 was going to be out in July. It's August and we're not in Alpha 2. So, I mean, I'm not afraid to be wrong, but I just think in my own little frame of mind, I think that's actually a great scenario, a great situation to be in to test Alpha 2 in December, because then bulk of people will be off. We'll have a lot more playtesting to be at hand. I just want them to release Alpha 2 in a state to where the overall feature set is done in a sense, but there's wiggle room to add that flexibility in case if something doesn't work, not because it's broken, but because players don't like it. Because I don't think that's what people are considering either, is the fact that what if a system is 100% done, but no one likes it or thinks it's a shit system? Like, we need time also to fix those issues as well. It's not just gonna be the issues where they're just flat out wrong or they don't work or are very buggy. It's also the thing to take into consideration that the system could just work in a way that is unfriendly to players.
I'm sorry, what about Alpha 1 combat?
Oh. That's what I'm saying. Like, you know, but that they had the time, right? They had the wiggle room to go from Alpha 1 to Alpha 2 and to make sure that the combat is going to feel satisfying in Alpha 2. But again, just because it's Alpha 2 doesn't mean off rip the combat's going to feel satisfying. It's going to go through constant iteration and constant updates and changes. So I really hope people are prepared for that once Alpha 2 goes live. Now, to kind of wrap up our conversation, Levio, because it honestly boggles my mind. We've already been talking for an hour and 8 minutes, but in general, like, what are your hopes and aspirations for Alpha 2? Like, what are you hoping we get from the testing?
From specifically Alpha 2, what I really want to see is solid class design. They don't have to be finished, they don't have to be polished, but I want to be able to walk away after the first week of Alpha 2 saying, I understand what their view of classes is. If that happens, and there's no major crashes like what they had with the speed glitch, I will say Alpha 2 is probably going to be done well. Because a lot of the rest of it can be saved until beta to really polish up. But if classes are not ready in Alpha 2, I think they're behind schedule, and we're going to see more major delays.
I actually agree with you, because it's so important. It's so crucially important. Not only do you get class design right, but you get combat right as well. And we can talk about the whole action to tab debate and abilities and all that other stuff. It just has to feel satisfying to push that button. If it does not feel satisfying, it's not going to feel good to play the overall whole of the game, because it's all integral to the combat. If your combat does not feel satisfying, it doesn't matter how great your story, it doesn't matter how great the nodes are. People are just going to fall off because it's just not satisfying to play the character itself. Yeah. I hope that class design is going to be at a solid place. I hope there is some sort of a redesign, or even just some sort of a streamlined way to explain the architecture of the class design better. That's what I hope for. Levio, dude, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. Like I said, you were actually one of the first people I met in the Ashes community, along with Zillin. So I always appreciate to hear your concerns and also your aspirations for Ashes, because, you know, you're a fellow summoner, dude. And I might be a summoner too. So what can I say? But so where can people find you on the tweeters and YouTubes?
So I am in the process of setting up my own YouTube channel, Leviojima.
Yes. Another YouTube.
I want to be able to stream it during Alpha 2. So I'll be over on Twitch under the same handle. But if you really want to chat and hang out, just come join the Axiom Discord server. Always recruiting. And if you don't want to come hang out with me, I have one last recommendation for you. Subscribe to this guy. He's one of the few people that sits down and constantly challenges me on my own viewpoint of the game. He'll help you do the same.
I try. Thank you, man. That was a nice thing. Well, I'm going to have all his links in the bottom below the description. So if you want to pre-support him before he starts doing this stuff, that's greatly appreciated for him. And it's another Ashes of Creation content creator, because believe me, like, we always talk Ashes in Axiom. We have once a month campfire discussions discussing Ashes in various topics in various ways to challenge ourselves and to really dig deep into the wiki, into what we think Ashes is going to be for the overall whole of the game. So Leviojima, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. And until next time, guys, my name is Vlhadus. This is the 1v1 podcast, and we will see you guys in the next one. Later, guys.